For too long, we've been fed the lie that skyrocketing housing prices in Toronto and Vancouver are just a natural phenomenon, beyond our control. But I'm here to tell you that's a load of excuses. Our elected officials are more interested in lining their pockets than addressing the housing crisis. The federal Liberal government has single-handedly fueled this crisis, and it's time to put aside petty politics and work towards real solutions. The fact is, this Prime Minister and his government have no intention of genuinely collaborating with Alberta or Canadians to address the housing crisis. It's a stark reality that's playing out in the corridors of power and the real estate market. Housing prices are skyrocketing, and affordability is a distant dream. You'd think politicians would be scrambling to find solutions. But no, they're too busy serving their own interests. But why? Is it the Bank of Canada's fault for keeping interest rates too low for too long? Or has the government's meddling in zoning and immigration created a supply and demand disaster? In this video, I will show you why Canadian politicians seem reluctant to see housing prices decline. Canada, once a beacon of affordability, now hosts some of the most unaffordable cities on the planet. Young Canadians are being priced out of the market and forced to abandon their dreams of homeownership. However, housing in Canada's market has been hijacked by a cabal of self-serving politicians who prioritize their own wealth over the well-being of citizens. As housing prices skyrocket, a sinister pattern emerges, revealing a conflict of interest that's nothing short of corruption. The country's most powerful politicians are not just passive observers, but active participants in the housing crisis, with vast portfolios of rental properties and development projects that benefit from soaring prices. They're landlords, real estate investors, and property developers who stand to lose millions if the housing bubble bursts. This isn't speculation, it's a matter of public record. The very people tasked with addressing the crisis are the ones profiting from it. Their reluctance to act isn't incompetence. It's a deliberate attempt to protect their own interests at the expense of ordinary Canadians. A recent shocking investigation exposed a dirty secret. At least 20% of sitting members of parliament are landlords, cashing in on the housing crisis they're supposed to be solving. The likes of Pierre Poilievre and his wife are raking in millions from their vast rental empires, while ordinary Canadians struggle to find affordable housing. But this corruption goes far beyond individual politicians. It's a systemic disease infecting every level of government. The real estate industry has a stranglehold on Canada's political system, dictating policy and padding the pockets of those in power. Homeownership, once a dream, has become a privilege reserved for the wealthy few. Meanwhile, Canada's political elite are laughing all the way to the bank, their rental properties appreciating in value as the housing market continues to soar. More than just an appreciating asset, homeownership is a rite of passage in Canada's hot housing market. When a for sale sign goes up, it's quickly replaced with sold. The Greater Vancouver area has cooled in recent months, but it's still expensive, with an average home price of more than $1.1 million. Home ownership in Canada is quickly becoming an out-of-reach fantasy for many Canadians, as the days of being able to afford a quality home in many Canadian cities, especially on a single income, are increasingly confined to the past. The opportunity afforded to previous generations no longer exists, and the problem seems to be only getting worse. Over the past 2 decades, home prices in Canada have increased by 375%, soaring to a national average of $816,000 in 2022, and over $1 million in British Columbia, a 24% increase in just 1 year. Even more important has been the abject deterioration in the house price-to-income ratio, more commonly referred to as affordability. Since 2005, no other G7 nation has seen the gap between home prices and incomes diverge as much as Canada. Compared to the United States, the disparity is downright shocking, especially considering Canada is the second largest and one of the least densely populated countries in the world. The results of this decrease in affordability are plain to see, with a recent poll revealing that 36% of young Canadians have given up on their dream of homeownership altogether, a feeling I, as a 32-year-old renter, can certainly relate to. According to reports, Canada lost some ground when it came to lowering its dependence on housing. Residential investment rose 0.1 points to 7.8% of GDP in Q3 of 2023, making it one of the economy's largest and most important sectors. This means that any significant downturn in the housing market could have devastating ripple effects across the entire country, leading to job losses, reduced consumer spending, and a general slowdown in economic growth. For politicians who are always looking to tout their economic track record and secure re-election, this is a risk that many are simply unwilling to take. After all, a booming housing market is often seen as a sign of a strong and growing economy, even if the reality is far more complex and troubling. However, the importance of housing to the economy goes even deeper than this. For politicians who rely on this robust industry support and often receive significant campaign contributions from developers and real estate firms, this is a risk that many are unwilling to take. This fear is not entirely unfounded. In the past, politicians who have taken steps to address housing affordability have sometimes faced backlash from the real estate industry and its allies. In British Columbia, for example, the provincial government's decision to introduce a foreign buyer's tax in 2016 was met with fierce opposition from the real estate industry, which argued that the tax would harm the economy and lead to job losses. Ideally, you want house prices to be somewhere around 3 to 4 times income. Historically, most of Canada was like that. But now, in Vancouver or Toronto, you get multiples of 12, 15, or 20, which is completely unaffordable, particularly if you don't have a fair bit of inherited wealth. In British Columbia, you're right. We used to talk about the rain or complain about the Canucks, but now it's all about housing affordability. You walk through neighborhoods and talk to other homeowners, and they know what every single house sold for, when, and to whom, and what it means for their own pocketbook. Big cities like Vancouver and Toronto have seen some of the largest price increases in the country. Houses that might otherwise be reserved for lower-income Canadians are selling for ridiculous prices. This crisis in affordability isn't restricted to large metropolitan centers. The same is happening in many smaller cities too, like Victoria, my hometown. From Victoria all the way up to Malahat, we've seen prices grow by 71% for detached homes in the last 5 years, with 65% of that growth occurring in the last 3 years. For example, a house was sold a couple of months ago for $1.848 million. It was purchased for less than $1 million in 2016, around $950,000. So the price of that home almost doubled in 5 or 6 years. Even more troubling is how the housing market can distort political priorities and lead to a focus on short-term gain over long-term sustainability. In the 2018 Ontario provincial election, for example, the real estate industry donated hundreds of thousands to the campaign of Premier Doug Ford and his Progressive Conservative Party, more than any other industry group. This flood of cash buys more than just access and influence. It buys a seat at the table when it comes to shaping the very policies that determine the future of housing in Canada. All too often, that seat is used to push for policies that prioritize the interests of developers and investors over those of ordinary Canadians. From the federal government's refusal to crack down on money laundering and tax evasion in the real estate market, to the provincial government's gutting of rent control and tenant protections, to the municipal government's zoning and permitting processes that prioritize luxury condos over affordable housing, the fingerprints of the real estate lobby are everywhere. For years, successive governments have relied on the Bank of Canada to keep interest rates low and the housing market humming, even as the cost of housing has soared out of reach for millions of Canadians. The bank's empty promises of a soft landing have been a thinly veiled excuse to prioritize the interests of wealthy investors and speculators over those of everyday Canadians. The housing crisis is not an accident. It's a deliberate result of the Bank of Canada's policies. By keeping interest rates low and fueling the housing market, they've created a perfect storm of unaffordability. However, while the Bank of Canada may be the most visible manifestation of this conflict of interest, it is far from the only one. In fact, the entire government apparatus, from the bureaucracy to the courts to the regulatory bodies that oversee the housing market, is shot through with individuals and institutions with a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. The truth is that the Canadian government will never want home prices to fall. This means thousands of families may end up losing their homes. This is even what we are seeing in the United States. If you like this video, hit the like button, and don't forget to subscribe to get notifications on our latest news. Make sure you check out one of these videos here to learn more. Thanks for watching.